Exploring designer versus niche fragrances. Let's do a quiz. If you had to define what a niche fragrance is, would you choose option A, a fragrance that is designed by a brand that makes only fragrances? Option B, a fragrance that is created for creativity purposes as opposed to mass appeal? Or is it option C, fragrances that are designed for the luxury market and are priced higher, over $120 usually? I'll give you 5 seconds to decide. Which option did you choose? Most people would have chosen option A, however, option B is the correct answer.
Mr. Marie time. Listen, if you don't like mango, don't get this. But if you want to get away from a blue scent for the summer or the hot weather, this is it. It's a beautiful yin and yang balance. Smooth, slightly sweet, slightly herby-ish. This is a beautiful scent. Unique. If you want to get away from blue scents and fresh scents, something different to stand out, this is it. And I think it's underpriced. I really do. And it lasts like 10 hours.
Today I want to focus on what the definition of a niche fragrance is and compare them to designer fragrances to help you decide which of the two sort of styles of perfumery you should buy. This is quite a hotly debated topic. It's actually getting more difficult to define what a niche fragrance is nowadays. A lot of people say that the niche market is now more saturated, oversaturated, and potentially isn't worth the money like it used to be. Fragrantica defines niche perfumery as an alternative to mass perfume production. Niche is limited by the clientele and therefore with a limited sale range. Thus, the goal of niche houses is not to sell as much as possible. A lot of people think niche means that it's a release made by a brand that only makes fragrances, but that is not the true definition. Niche perfumery sprouted mainly in the early 2000s as a response to the generic nature of mainstream perfumery. You had houses like Frederic Malle, Le Labo by Rideau, Creed was already leading the way. These fragrance houses focus on having a particular style that wouldn't appeal to everyone, and as the name suggests, was trying to target a niche of customers. Brands like these would often have higher prices compared to designer, have higher concentrations, as well as have more natural ingredients in their compounds. But those were the early days. A lot of people might actually argue that niche fragrances have now become mainstream in themselves and are no longer as truly niche as they used to be. So today in this video, I'm going to choose 2 fragrances. Representing the designer side is going to be Prada Luna Rosa Black, a very classic middle of the range, safe fragrance. And then representing niche, I'm going to go for Parfum de Marly Carlisle, which is a very intense and tricky fragrance to understand. Using these 2 examples throughout the video, I'm going to be comparing designer versus niche fragrances, talking about the main categories of the scent profile, the performance you usually get, the wearability of these different fragrances, as well as finally the price for value category. To simplify this video and help you guys understand the difference between these two, I'm going to be using generalizations. At the end of the day, take this video with a pinch of salt. Sometimes niche fragrances seem like they should actually be designer fragrances, and some designer fragrances seem like they should be niche. So vice versa. It goes both ways, but this is just a general video on the topic. So let's talk about scent profile. So in designer brands, you often get fragrances like Prada Luna Rosa Black that will generally have more easy to love perfumery that's mass appealing, that's designed to try and sell as much as possible and as often as possible, with easier to understand DNAs, and usually the DNAs are not as natural and less complex and usually not as mature as niche fragrances. So Prada Luna Rosa Black is quite a simple linear marzipan tonka fragrance that has a very dark lotion-like effect to it. It stays linear, it's not complex, it doesn't change on its dry down a lot. Most people will understand this fragrance and appreciate it. It is an evening fragrance just like Carlisle. However, Carlisle is packed full of naturals, a lot of high quality florals, vanilla and patchouli in here. It's more tricky to understand, it is more mature, it's more complex, and it changes a lot on the dry down. You're getting a more complete experience with this product, but that's because you're paying 5 times the price of Prada Luna Rosa Black. So when considering scent profiles, bear in mind that actually most niche fragrances will not be appropriate for beginners in the perfume hobby, because you just need to take time to understand perfumery, the art of it, and let your nose appreciate the different style there is in a basic way first, and then build your way up to the more complex stuff like Carlisle. And the reason I say most niche fragrances are generally more mature is because they know their clientele. If you're spending a lot of money like this, you're spending £300, you're usually going to be a more older individual compared to young people who are teenagers and not going to have that kind of money to spend on fragrances. Next up, performance. I actually get about 8 hours of the soft projection with Prada Luna Rosa Black and about 14 hours of the medium projection on Carlisle. Now, when you consider the difference in price, it's actually not as huge a difference as you'd expect in performance. I'd actually say that the two categories fit each other closer than you think. You get some niche fragrances that are very natural, have very expensive ingredients, but don't last that long. You can have the highest quality neroli oil in the world, but the neroli at the end of the day is a top note. You can have a very expensive fragrance because you use a very high quality neroli, but it's still going to disappear quickly. I do think designers, as long as you're in the mid-range to higher end price tag of designer fragrances, can often compete in performance to niche fragrances. You do get to a certain stage with niche fragrances. If you're spending like £300 and above, you're going to be expecting really good performance. At that price range, I think brands generally know that you're going to have the strongest stuff. You're just going to have a lot of things like oud in there. That's going to be potent, powerful. That's going to make you feel like you got something that's worth the money. So it depends on the price tag of the designer fragrance and the price tag of the niche fragrance, but generally I'd say these two actually match fairly close in terms of performance. So you might get 14 hours with Carlisle, but a designer fragrance that is similar in occasions to wear would be something like Jean Paul Gaultier Le Mal Le Parfum, which I get 10 hours for, which is still very close to Carlisle. Bear in mind, niche fragrances generally have higher concentrations in their compounds compared to eau de toilettes from designer fragrances. You'll never get a niche fragrance less than an eau de parfum in the vast majority of cases. Having a higher concentration of fragrance oil makes your fragrance last longer and usually project more as well. But again, this is a generalization. It's not a hard, fast rule. It really depends on a case-by-case basis. Next up is ease of wearability. Prada Luna Rosa Black is easier to wear, it can be understood by more people, it's easier to be worn by all age groups, whilst Carlisle is really for the perfume snobs, for older gentlemen, and it's just for people who really like this particular style. It's not a mass appealing style, you have to really enjoy dark fragrances. Luna Rosa Black is also fairly dark, but it's an easy type of dark fragrance. So wearability, designer fragrances are by their nature designed for that, for mass wearability. So as a wearer, if you don't care about compliments, you enjoy fragrances for the art form and you enjoy wearing them for yourself mainly, then you go for niche fragrances. That is my general suggestion. And then finally, a hot topic is the price value proposition of designer fragrances versus niche. Now, I actually think too many collectors waste too much money on cheap designer fragrances that gather dust because they're not spectacular in their quality, they're not memorable enough, and they end up getting neglected so that other fragrances in that wearer's collection get used instead. I think every collector should just start off with a few cheap fragrances and then upgrade to the middle of the range to high-end designer fragrances quickly. They are more long-lasting in terms of relevance to you and your collection. They're just better quality, more complex, more interesting. I think they are worth the money because you end up going for quality and not quantity in your collection. Even if you are spending money on 20 to 30 pound fragrances, you often find that you just want to buy lots of them and you actually end up spending more money than you intend originally. A lot of us are also angry with niche fragrances because a lot of times you get clone houses that recreate a niche fragrance for 1/10 of the cost sometimes, and you wonder why these things are so expensive. I will say some niche fragrances are overpriced, but I will also come to their defense and say that we are celebrating the quality of ingredients, the creativity of the perfumer to actually make the original creation, which takes a long time to do, and also a lot of times the concentration is very high in some of these fragrances. I brought out for this video Amouage Reflection 45. So as the name suggests, this is a 45% concentration product. Almost half of this entire bottle is pure fragrance oil and the other half is perfumer's alcohol. If you take a generic eau de toilette on the designer market, that's usually around 10% compared to 45%, you can start to see why this might be priced at £400. So let's do the math. Let's say you have a 9% eau de toilette designer fragrance versus Reflection 45. That's 5 of those eau de toilettes in one bottle here. So if you do 400 divided by 5, that's £80 per theoretical bottle inside Reflection 45. When you take into account how beautifully it's blended and the quality of the natural ingredients in here, you can start to understand why it's priced so highly. You can understand at some points why brands price some of their products so high, because some brands should exist in a way that they go all out in the perfumery, in the ingredients, and do not limit themselves through budget so that products like Reflection 45 can exist. We have our cheaper products, but we should also have the extreme end of luxury as well to see what is possible in the realms of perfumery. So to conclude this video, at the end of the day, whether or not a niche fragrance or designer fragrance is worth the money is up to you as the wearer. I'll give you my personal opinion in the fact that I think niche fragrances generally are the superior product. You generally are getting what you pay for. I currently am mainly interested in niche fragrances myself after collecting for at least 4 years now. And I really just like their complexity, the fact that they're more bold and creative and risky. And how I would define a niche fragrance personally is that it's a fragrance that is created as something that is for the love and creativity of perfumery rather than something that's just a cash grab, which I understand is a very subjective definition to give to a fragrance for niche, and that means different brands can have different fragrances that are both considered niche and designer. I would say some of Parfum de Marly's stuff themselves, some of their scents are niche and some of them should be considered designer actually, in my opinion. And after saying that, guys, I have an interesting question for you. Would you consider the private line of designer houses as niche fragrances? So that's fragrances like the private blend in Tom Ford or the private line for Dior or Chanel. Leave your answers in the comments below. My overall recommendation is as before. Get a few cheapies in the designer realm and then focus on the mid-range to high-end designers. In my opinion, get quality, not quantity in your collection, and then also upgrade to niche and just see that they're usually better. I see niche fragrances as the gourmet of the fragrance world. If you go to really fancy restaurants regularly, you will start to appreciate just how low quality a fast food chain like McDonald's is, for example. That is why once you develop your taste buds for the higher end perfumery, I think it's difficult to go back, and that is why I recommend people to upgrade to niche as soon as they can. Get samples of niche fragrances, try them out before you commit to full bottles, and you'll generally apply a really smart tactic to building a collection. But I want to hear your thoughts, guys. What do you think of this hotly debated topic? Do you agree or disagree with what I've said about niche versus designer fragrances today? Has this helped you identify what a niche fragrance is and what the market is all about? And do you feel like you have a clear definition of what niche is right now? If you want to share your own definition of what a niche fragrance is, go ahead, share in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, guys, make sure to check out our other video on how to avoid low quality fragrances, and I'll see you guys in the next one.